We hear back from alums decades after they've left the business school. We get, gee, I just got promoted. I just became a CEO because of what I learned in this class. We've gotten emails, one of my favorites, an email from an engineer who'd risen up the ranks to become an engineering manager in a very big company in the Valley. And the email in bold just said, OMG, this stuff works. And then, of course, I've gotten I'm pretty sure this class just saved my marriage.
It's time! Work, play, evolve!
I want to connect the listeners to the best of the best. Welcome to the Evolve Broker Podcast. I'm your host, Pat Costello, the co-founder and principal at Evolve MBA. Our mission for the podcast is to bring the best of the best to the insurance industry. My guests today teach the most famous and popular course offered in the Stanford MBA program. Their class is called Interpersonal Dynamics, and my guests are Carole Robin and David Bradford. Their class teaches students how to build exceptional relationships. They're releasing a book in February called Connect that breaks down the class's major lessons. In my opinion, there isn't a more important book for the insurance industry because, as I've said before, we are in the relationship business. I'm honored because I was able to read the book and speak with them prior to its release. We go through the major takeaways that you can apply to your relationships with your prospects, your clients, your coworkers, your family, and even your significant other. This book is recommended by some of the most influential people in the world. It has received endorsements from Reid Hoffman, the co-founder of LinkedIn, Arianna Huffington, co-founder of Huffington Post and CEO of Thrive Global, and Ray Dalio, the founder of Bridgewater Associates and author of the book Principles, just to name a few. In life, there are few things more rewarding than having a relationship with someone that you can truly call exceptional. It's one of the primary keys to happiness, and I promise that you will be able to take what you hear today and apply it to your personal and professional life immediately, because I know that I have. Without further ado, here's Carole and David. Carole Robin and David Bradford, welcome to the Evolve Broker Podcast.
Thank you.
Good to be here.
The two of you teach the most famous and popular course at Stanford Business School. It's called Interpersonal Dynamics, and a lot of people refer to it as the touchy-feely course. Can you explain the purpose of the course and why it's been so transformative for the students that have taken it?
Yeah, it's a different sort of course than any other course in that students learn from each other more than they learn from us. They're in 12-person groups, and their job is to build a group where they can learn from each other. And they look at their interactions, they give feedback to each other. And what is powerful about it is students take the risk of showing more of themselves, being more authentic, setting aside the sort of spins that they often do in the classroom, and become real people to each other. Why it's so powerful is what they discover is that by being themselves, by being authentic, they're more likable, they're more influenceable, they're more leader-like. So it's a very affirming course, and they learn how to acquire the competencies to build those open relationships after the course is over with the friends and with colleagues.
So do you have any stories of students coming back and letting you know how they used the skills that they learned in the course in their personal lives?
Yeah, one of the most gratifying aspects of all this for us is that we hear back from alums decades after they've left the business school.
Wow.
And we get the whole gamut. We get, gee, I just got promoted. I just became a CEO because of what I learned in this class. Because I learned that I cut people off and they don't know why I'm cutting them off. And because I learned that, I don't do that anymore. And I'm pretty sure it's helped me, get to where I've gotten. We've gotten emails. One of my favorites, an email from an engineer who'd risen up the ranks to become an engineering manager in a very big company in the Valley. And the email in bold just said, OMG, this stuff works. And he told me the story of having tried to motivate his team and how frustrated he was getting over the fact that they weren't responding. And then he finally just said something. Wow, you guys, this is really hard for me. That none of you are talking about what's going on for you. And then all of a sudden they started talking, and then pretty soon they got to the bottom of why nobody was responding. So and then of course I've gotten I'm pretty sure this class just saved my marriage emails.
Wow.
So yeah, lots of stories.
That's so cool. And you guys mentioned in the book, building an exceptional relationship is similar to climbing a mountain. And, it's hard at first. You face a huge head wall, and then at the top you get to a beautiful meadow. Can you talk about the analogy of the mountain and the 6 hallmarks of exceptional relationships?
Yeah. So we actually talk, the first 10 chapters of the book are equivalent to getting to an upper meadow of a climb of a mountain. When you first start to get to know somebody at the foothills, you talk about whatever, and it's pretty easy. But as you start to try to create more of a relationship, perhaps, I take a little bit more of a risk. I tell you that my first grandson was just born when we're at the foot of the mountain, by the way, true story, which is not very risky. But as we start to climb, I tell you a little bit about how it's probably a good thing that my grandson was born at the same time that I'm trying to launch my first book, because I'm an obsessive compulsive, and I can only be so obsessive about one thing at a time, and having 2 things is better for everyone in my life. Now you get to know me a little bit better. But I say that in a light tone. That doesn't feel quite as risky. But maybe if you tell me something along the way that feels disclosing on your part, I start to tell you more about what's going on for me and where I am in my life right now and why these things are so meaningful. And pretty soon, what we're doing is we're building a more meaningful, deeper relationship. And the whole first part of the book is about how to do that with anybody, a more functional, meaningful, productive relationship. Somewhere along the line, I notice that you're not saying much. And then I'm thinking, wow, I'm out here. I've said a lot. And then I say, gee, Pat, I've been talking a lot and I sort of feel exposed out here. I sure wish you'd tell me something about you. And then you say perhaps to me, well, Carole, if you would stop long enough for me to be able to say something to you, then maybe I would. Maybe you would say that in a kinder, nicer way. But if what we're both doing is saying things to each other in the spirit of getting to know each other and help each other create a better, more functional relationship, then we're slowly climbing the mountain. And we talk about the upper meadow as not the top of the mountain, but the upper meadow is where every relationship can get, and whether that's professionally or personally. Then there's the peak. And, at the peak, sometimes right now it looks really clear, but sometimes it gets really foggy and rainy and colder. The meadow is kind of a nice place. There's wildflowers and it's lovely. And so we have to decide whether or not we want to continue the climb or just stay at the meadow. The meadow is still way better than the foothills were. But if we decide to keep climbing, we're going to continue to deepen some of the skills and competencies that got us to the meadow. And now we're starting to get into what are the hallmarks of an exceptional relationship. That's a relationship where we can both be vulnerable and more fully ourselves, where we can be honest with each other and not be afraid that whatever we disclose to each other is going to be used against us, where we've learned to deal with conflict productively. Where we're both committed to each other's learning and growth. And it's not until we have all of those that we're reaching exceptional. The only place where the metaphor kind of falls apart a little bit is that it implies that somehow there's some peak and now you're done. And of course, you're never done. Relationships,
Always climbing.
Always climbing, always exist on a continuum. And the higher you go, the harder work they are, and the more gratifying and fulfilling they are.
And the meadow is almost the reward, right?
The meadow is somewhere between base camp. It's your first reward and your goal. But I want to say one other thing, which is I don't think David and I intend for people to walk away thinking every relationship in their life has to be exceptional. We would like everybody to walk away believing every relationship can get to the meadow. But it's a lot of work and a lot of energy, and not necessarily something that's sustainable to have an exceptional relationship with dozens of people or, hundreds of people. And
Carole, just to jump in really quick, in the book you mentioned in a specific part that occurred with your mom. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah. My mother and I'm not sure my mother and I ever even got to the meadow, by the way. I loved my mother and my mother loved me. And when we go back to some of those hallmarks that I just talked about, I don't think my mother was ever willing to be really vulnerable with me because she had an image that she was very attached to. And I think, so that's one thing. I think we never learned to deal with conflict productively. We learned, but partly because we had a pattern that required that I acquiesce and that she be right and I be wrong. But perhaps the most important element that we were missing is that I don't think we were really committed to each other's learning and growth. I think I think she was committed to my learning and growth when I was a child. But that's and I never even knew what it was like to be committed to a parent's learning and growth. And when I got grown up enough to want to do that, she didn't want to play ball.
Got it. And it sounds like one of the big takeaway from the book is it really takes two to tango. You got to have two people that are committed. So I really appreciate you sharing that example with your mom. And I have to tell you, when I was reading about the meadow in the book, I don't know if you guys have seen the movie Happy Gilmore with Adam Sandler.
Yeah.
If that rings any bells.
Yes.
In the movie, he goes to his happy place when he's putting, which is like this paradise with beer everywhere. It's kind of the way what was going through my head when I was picturing the meadow. So just to give you some insight to my thoughts there. But it sounds like one of the biggest ways to get an exceptional relationship is based on self-disclosure. But obviously, we don't want to take that too far. Like if we started this conversation off and I was just going through my, track record of using dating apps during the pandemic, that might, be weird, right? It might come off odd and might be like, well, this isn't, I don't know if I'm ready to start a relationship with this person, whatever type of relation it is. But can you talk about disclosing information and where the line is so that you don't disclose too much information?
Well, Patrick, I think you put your finger on it when you said it takes two to tango. And this is not diarrhea of the mouth where I share everything, that I need to be sensitive to your reaction. We talk about the 15% rule, which is often we stay in the spot where we're very, very comfortable. We haven't even reached the head wall. And we talk about sports or we talk about the latest movie we've seen. And then we can move 15% out of our comfort zone. That's our comfort zone. And we can share something that's a little more personal. Now we can see the other person's reaction and we can see whether we still feel comfortable. And now we can move another 15%. But I think there's an important distinction to make here. When we talk about self-disclosure, most people think of some sort of event or action they have done. And one of the things that we stress in the book is sharing your emotions, sharing your feelings. That's really the more personal part about it. So Carole just told a wonderful story about her mother, but there was also probably a lot of feelings. It wasn't fully appropriate then, so I'm going to add it now, and I'm guessing. But if I were in Carole's position, I would feel a sense of loss. I'd feel some wistfulness of, could I have had a closer relationship? I might also feel a little chagrin. Could I have done more? And I think what we underestimate with self-disclosure is the power of feelings. And we tend to fill in the spaces with things or events. And the feelings that go with them is much more information about who I am and what's important to me. So I think that if we can keep to the 15%, be aware of the other person's reaction and use that as a cue, we can see them sort of say, okay, non-verbally, I've had enough. And maybe then they want to share their 15%. And then we can share more of ours. So it's an iterative growing process as both of us follow this trail up the mountain.
And I have a great example right now. What David just said about how I might be feeling about my mother gives me a little invitation to go a little farther outside my comfort zone by saying, wow, I wonder what people who are listening to me, who wrote a book about relationships, think when I say I was never really able to get there with my own mother. Makes me feel a little insecure, makes me feel a little worried. Now I'm definitely stepping outside my comfort zone, and I can feel it in my body.
That 15% rule was one of my biggest takeaways from the book, and it's something that I'm going to practice moving forward for sure. Many people are afraid to disclose things out of fear of rejection. But you guys talk about in the book that by not disclosing things, you actually could be hurting yourself more. Can you talk about how not disclosing things can hurt us?
People like to make sense of things. You know, human beings want to understand. So the less I tell you about me, the more you're going to fill in the blanks with whatever you decide to fill the blanks in with. So while I may be afraid of disclosing something to you for fear of how you'll react, not disclosing only gives me less opportunity to have you know me in the way I want to be known. So that's the first.
As you're not disclosing things, I'm essentially making up a story in my head to kind of feel more comfortable with the fact that I know who you are. I have a handle on you.
Yeah, well, and also you have a little bit of data, a tiny bit of data about me. So you get to make up a very big story. The more data I give you, the more information you have, the harder it is for you to entirely make up your own story. I used to have a partner who used to say fear is an acronym sometimes for false expectations appearing real. Which I always thought was which I always thought was really interesting. When I'm afraid, how much, and by the way, if I really want to control my own, how you see me, then the more I tell you, the more control I'm going to have, not the less.
The disclosure has the control.
Let me underline that all of this is a risk. The book does not give 5 easy answers.
Right.
It is a risk of how much do I share, and it's a risk of what I don't share. And it's a risk of how you respond. But relationships don't grow unless we're willing to take these risks. And the other thing is, even if we make a mistake, can we talk about that and recover?
Let's be clear for everybody. One thing you guys say explicitly in the book is most people are way too cautious with disclosing information. It sounds like most people are far more reserved than they actually should be. Can you guys expand on that a little bit?
Well, hang on. They're especially cautious about disclosing feelings. Back to the point that David made earlier.
Absolutely.
And so I've got a great example for you. I was talking to a friend of mine recently, and I was feeling disappointed that she had not asked me more about what was going on for me, particularly because I'm really spun up about my book. And I was like, it's sort of, I feel disappointed. It's like, I don't know, do you care?
Mm-hmm.
And she said, I would never know that you wanted me to ask you more about it, because when we talk about it, you do talk about all the stuff that's going on. You do talk about how much you hope it's a success. You also talk about how you're crushing it. You don't talk about how afraid you are that it's actually not going to be a big hit. And she said, so then how? So I didn't think there was a whole lot of need or reason to ask you a lot about it, much less that you needed support. And I said to her, I need some support. She said, I would have never known.
Okay. So it sounds like disclosing feelings can be a lot more impactful than just disclosing information. I can tell you guys, I could be way better at that. We actually recently had a personality consultant come in for our company, because it's part of our hiring process now. And there's a scale in our personality survey that's logic versus emotion. And I am a 10 on logic. So it's as far as you can be to the right, to the point where our personality consultant was calling me Spock. And so it's very hard for me to relate to when someone's getting super emotional about something, and my knee-jerk reaction is to come in and break it down logically. And I know with a lot of relationships I have, I need to change that, and I could be better at that. So that was one huge takeaway. But I also loved how you guys talked about the specific ways to use the words "I feel" in a sentence. How should we be using the words "I feel" in a sentence?
Well, the problem there is, in the English language, I feel stands for two things. What we like to stress is we use the word I feel to express an emotion. I feel sad. I feel excited. I feel impressed, Patrick, that you just told this story. Those are all emotions. But we also use I feel to express an opinion. And the cue here is, if you hear somebody say, I feel like, I feel that, I feel as, you'll never get an emotion. We don't say, I feel that I feel like angry. That's an opinion. So we say, I feel that you ought to show more emotions, Patrick, is an opinion. So and this is a very hard distinction, because people use I feel all the time, and probably 95% of the time it's an opinion. So in the student learning groups, we are very adamant that whenever we hear I feel that, we come in, we say, I hear that's your opinion. Now, what do you really feel? What's the emotion? And the cue is, and we watch ourselves and we watch our friends, sometimes to their annoyance, that when we use the word I feel, can it really be an emotion? I feel excited about this. I really feel good about being here with you. And that's the sort of thing that we often don't share. And if we shared it, it would make greater connections. So yesterday, I actually had coffee, distance, with a friend who's been having some heart problems. And he started to share that and his concerns about that. And at the very end, I said, I really feel touched that you were that open with me. And those sort of sharing of feelings is how we get close to people and how we can build connections. Sharing ideas can be interesting. We could learn from it, but it doesn't make deep connections as often.
In fact, Pat, there's a reason that there's a vocabulary of feelings in the appendix of the book, because we are so bad at accessing our feelings, and we think we're expressing feelings, that we actually had to tell our students, start I feel, and then pull up your vocabulary and find the feeling.
I have to say, when I read the book and I read the specific part about using the words I feel, I look back on how I use those words, and the amount of times I'm saying I feel like or I feel that are off the charts. So I challenge anybody that's listening to this to change the way that they're using those terms in their sentences on the day-to-day, because even sometimes I think when you say, like, I feel like, you're being overbearing, I feel that, this specific situation is a certain way. A lot of times people can take it as an attack or an accusation. So I think changing that would make us a lot more vulnerable. And that's the next topic I want to talk about, is true vulnerability, because there's vulnerability and then there's vulnerability. And I want to talk about the true vulnerability that helps build exceptional relationships. Can you guys talk about what true vulnerability is?
Well, vulnerability is sharing things about myself when I'm not sure what the effect is going to be. And we have interesting examples from the groups, from these student groups. Sometimes students will share something that happened to them outside, and it doesn't have much of an impact. And what we realize is they've shared that story 72 times before. They know what the effect is going to be.
They know how people are going to react.
They know how people are going to react. But sharing what you don't know is going to be the impact is really true vulnerability. Now, one of the questions, of course, is what about in a work situation? Should one be vulnerable there? And the distinction I would make is between vulnerability that makes me human and vulnerability that casts doubt on my competence. So the way I put it, I've taught the leadership course. So I say to the students, if I walked into this class and said, I don't know anything about leadership, but I've been assigned this class, you'd rush out of the room. But if I walk in and say, I'm going to be a little distracted today because my son is sick, but I'm really going to try to be present, then I become more human. And I want to give you a work experience. I was observing an executive team. This was a company in which, we'll call him Bill, had been the president. His father had been the CEO, and Bill had been taking over more and more responsibility. His father was aging, finally died. So I was in the meeting after the funeral, and most of the executive team had been at the funeral. And Bill put aside the agenda and said, I want to tell you what's going on with me. He said, obviously, I feel sad about Dad having died, but I also feel this great responsibility now. I know I can do this job. I know I'm going to need your help, but I feel this responsibility of the family. My father's not here, but he's sort of still here. And Bill talked about what was going on for him, having now fully taken the helm and having all of these expectations around him. And you could feel the team just coalesce around him. So what he was doing is he was being vulnerable about himself being a human. Now, it wouldn't have worked if he would have said, I don't belong here, I'm not competent, I'm only here because I'm my father's son. Fortunately, that wasn't the case, but that's not the vulnerability we're talking about. We're talking about the vulnerability that makes me human, and managers can do that. And if they do that, then other people can be open and vulnerable themselves. If I, as a boss, have to appear perfect, nothing's wrong, I've got everything in order, I'm going to build a climate where everybody else is going to fake it as well. And that's not going to be a very productive climate.
I have a personal example of the cost of that of exactly what David just talked about that happened to me. So, I have a lot of different careers. My very first career was in sales and marketing for 10 years. And I had climbed the proverbial corporate ladder. I was running a team of, at the time, they were all guys. It was in industrial automation. And I was running a $50 million business. 13 Western states. We were at an offsite. I was trying to convince them all to do something, influence them to follow me to do something. And I was getting crickets. And I got more excited and I got crickets. And I got even more excited. And then I was like, come on, you guys, why can't, if we all rallied and did this would be really exciting. And one of my guys leaned over and looked at me and said, is that like water in the corner of your eye? And then he said, are you going to cry? But then he said, are you human after all?
Wow. That's
and
powerful.
When he said, are you human after all? Then I burst out crying. And then I burst out crying and said, you don't think I'm effing human? And I used the full expletive. I don't think there's anything more important for us to talk about than that. And I tore up our agenda, and we spent the next 2 days talking about who we were, why we were there, what we were hoping to accomplish. That's when we became a team. And to this day, I believe that was more than 40 years ago. To this day, I believe those guys would follow me anywhere.
That's so cool. And Carole, I know you mentioned that example in the book. One thing I was thinking about when I was reading it was some of the greatest leaders who've shown vulnerability. One that came to mind was Winston Churchill, who would regularly tear up in front of groups. Carole, I know you mentioned your example. I saw my dad, who ran an insurance agency for 30 years, do that in a couple public speaking situations when he was talking about employees, and the bonding effect after that was amazing. And so I think it's really important if leaders can learn to be vulnerable in the right ways, like David was clarifying.
And at the right time, by the way. If I had burst out crying 7 years earlier at the beginning of my career, it would not have been a good thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Timing is key. No doubt about that. The next topic I want to touch on, guys, is empathy versus sympathy, and how empathy is far more impactful when it comes to building that exceptional relationship, and why sympathy is not nearly as powerful. Can you guys break down why empathy is so effective and the difference between sympathy and empathy?
So this goes back to what David was talking about earlier about feelings. So when we feel sympathy, we more than likely feel sorry for somebody. When we feel empathy, we feel what they're feeling. So you're really upset. Mm-hmm. So I may not understand why you're upset, but I've been upset before, and I know what that feels like. And if I can convey to you that I understand that feeling, you're going to feel more what we call emotionally met. And A, you're going to be invited to tell me more about it. And B, you're not going to feel judged by it, by me in feeling that way. And so I think the mistake a lot of people make is that they don't realize that I might not understand why you're sad about something. But I've been sad. I know sadness, so I can connect with you around sadness, not around the thing.
Yes, that's a key differentiator. You don't have to go through that experience, but you have felt those feelings before, and that sounds like it's one of the best ways to relate to somebody.
And again, let me give you the example that I had yesterday with my friend Tom, that he was talking about his heart health problems. He wasn't quite sure what it was. I could have been sympathetic, and I think I was, but I was also empathic because this was a heart problem. He was concerned about his mortality. At my age, I'm also concerned about my mortality. So that was a case in which I could really be with him as a person who was experiencing what he was feeling. And we both talked about the whole notion of how we felt about our life and fears we had about our health. And that sort of empathic relationship connection allowed both of us to self-disclose. So there was an example where He went 15%, I went 15%, he went another 15%. And again, that's what builds connections.
Sympathy can make someone else feel one down.
Yeah, it's
If you
almost
feel
like
sorry-
it's almost like some sort of pity, right?
Yeah,
Yep.
right, exactly.
Yeah. So why is advice not very helpful in building an exceptional relationship?
Well, there's a whole bunch of reasons. One is advice is usually giving the answer for how you ought to do it. So you go to somebody else and you say, gee, I've got this problem, and the other person immediately thinks they ought to solve it. There's a whole bunch of things that are wrong with that. The person who wants to solve it probably doesn't fully understand the situation. Second, at least I find that when somebody tells me what I ought to do, I've probably thought of that already, so it's not very helpful. But even worse is that the answer they give me is how they would do it. I've got my style, the other person has their style, they're responding out of their style.
Mm-hmm. It doesn't apply to you.
And that sort of doesn't work. So advice rarely works. Now, what does work, this doesn't mean the other person can't be helpful. What does work is if they help me explore what's going on for me. And there's a wonderful concept from the coaching field, which says the other person has buried within themselves probably the answer to what's going on. Can you help me explore that? And the best way to do that is not to tell me what to do, but to ask a bunch of open-ended questions. I say open-ended because most questions that are closed-ended, which can be answered in yes or no, are really advice. So saying, well, have you thought of doing X isn't a question, it's advice. But open-ended opens possibilities. So can the other person say, well, what are your concerns, David? What have you thought of doing? What are you worried might happen if you were to do some of those things? That gets me to think deeper, and it's likely that I'm going to somehow come out with the answer. That's what can be helpful, not telling me what to do.
When we are on the road or on the mountain to experiencing exceptional relationships, we will go through pinches and crunches.
Yeah.
Can you break down what pinches and crunches are and how they're best dealt with?
Oh, pinches and crunches is one of my favorite concepts. When I do something that's mildly annoying to you, your tendency is not to say anything, which means I don't know that I've been mildly annoying, which means I'll continue to do it. And the more I do it, the more it will annoy you. When it's little, it's a pinch. And, it bothered me that that's the third time you interrupted me. And then we clean it up. I'm like, oh gosh, I didn't even realize that. I'm now aware. I stop interrupting you. But you don't say anything. Now I interrupt you. We've had 7 different conversations. You've become more and more irritated. And now it's become a crunch. And now that's a different category of upset. So one of the things we talk about a lot in the book is how to clean up pinches when they're still small before they become crunches, which takes us to something that I was hoping David would talk about, which is one of the ways that we deal more effectively with a pinch and keep it from becoming a crunch is in giving people feedback effectively. And by the way, giving effective feedback is also relevant to lots more than just pinches and crunches. So take it away, David.
Good, glad to. Let me just add one small thing. Everything that Carole said is absolutely true. We don't want to imply that every little pinch ought to be responded to. I mean, life is short and people bother us. So the question is, what do I respond to and what do I not respond to? And for me, the guideline I use is that if that pinch sort of goes away, then I may not want to raise it. But if it lingers, or if I sort of come back and think about it, then I probably do want to raise it. So again, you don't share everything. We are judicious about what we do, but we do err on the side of holding back too much. So the whole notion of feedback, we have the phrase in this course, and it's now shared around the Stanford Graduate School of Business, that feedback is a gift. We tend to think that feedback is an attack, and it's often given in a way that's an attack. But if it's given in the right way, it's a gift. Now, you're going to have to bear with me because this gets a little complicated, but it's very, very important, and it's crucial to the book and crucial to the course. It turns out that I need you in order to know me. That's the basic idea of this. And behind that is the notion that there are three realities. There's me, my intentions, what I want to do. That's my area of expertise. There's my behavior, second reality. Third reality is the impact on you. I don't know the impact on the other person, but I need to know that. So I'm intending to be clear. I'm perfectly clear to me. I don't know whether I'm clear to you. But Patrick, I see you nodding. So I'm assuming that's a little form of feedback that I'm hopefully clear. So I need your response. So if you can keep in mind that your expertise in giving feedback is pointing out the behavior and sharing the response, often the feeling response, then it's helpful. Because if I don't know the impact of my behavior, I'm shooting in the dark. And one doesn't hit the target when you shoot in the dark. We have the concept of a net between the first and the second reality. So we want you to think about tennis. You can't play in the other person's backcourt. That's not kosher. You got to stay on your side of the net. But most feedback is over the net. So if I say to Carole, well, you just want to do this, I'm over the net. I don't know what the devil she wants. But if I say, when you do X, this is how I feel, she can't say, no, you don't. She's over my net. And if I give feedback as a way to help the other person be more effective and to help our relationship, because I'm being annoyed at this constant pinches I'm having, then feedback is a gift.
That's a really good analogy with the tennis and staying on your side of the net. I think the other big thing about feedback is that it's got to be specific, because like you're saying, David, if I were to just say, David, I just think you're so mean, right? There's nothing that you can learn from to change your behavior to not be mean anymore, right?
That's right, but that's a great point. So that's not helpful to me, and I'm first going to feel defensive. Mm-hmm. But there's a way that I can push you back over the net, Patrick. I can, gee, that's not my intention, reality number one. But clearly I'm doing something that's giving you that reaction. What am I doing? So I'm pushing you back to the behavior. Now, that requires that I push my defensiveness down, set aside my desire to explain myself, but I've turned an accusation into a learned experience. So the feedback model works in giving, and it also works in receiving.
When we talk about the workplace, specifically with our coworkers, I'd love to know your guys' thoughts on building exceptional relationships with coworkers, because that is definitely a unique type of relationship.
Yeah, definitely more challenging, not impossible, but has a whole set of additional challenges attached to it. If we go back to one of the fundamental premises of an exceptional relationship is that we're both committed to each other's growth and development. In an organizational context, can I be committed to your growth and development if that means that you work for me and I've got a really challenging assignment that you would grow from, but maybe this isn't the time to test out whether or not you can do it? If I'm committed to your growth, if you're committed to my growth and development, are you willing to step aside for for me for that promotion that we both could be getting. So, there are power differentials in organizations. There are other factors that have to be taken into account in organizational contexts. And I'm back to something that feels really fundamental to me, which is what I said at the beginning. Every relationship, including all relationships in organizations, can reach the meadow. They can all be more functional. They can all be certainly deeper, more meaningful. They can also be exceptional, and the same principles apply, and it takes the same work, but it requires paying attention to some of these additional challenges, and they're not always, they're just more challenging. I think I'll just leave it at that. I want to say that there's a fundamental premise in the book about having two antennae, and how building a really great, robust relationship requires an antenna that's internally, that's picking up internal signals, like what's going on for me right now, and an antenna that's picking up signals on what's going on for you that I'm trying to pick up. And it's my capacity to always have both of those, be mindful about both of those antennae and what's going on with them, and having them interdependently making choices. In a business situation, there's in any situation, there's the situation, but in a business situation, those antennae have to be tuned even more carefully.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think to build on that, there's another concept in the book which we haven't talked about, which is crucial. And that's the issue of, can we talk about what we can't talk about? Can we talk about how we're talking? So let me go back to Carole's example of, gee, I've got a dilemma. There's a project that the boss is considering, and I want it, and I know you want it, and both of us want to advance. Rather than going silent or sabotaging the other, can we just say that? Say, we've got a dilemma here. Both of us want it. Let's make sure that we don't sabotage each other, and let's have the boss hopefully make a decision that is best for the organization. So with these two antennae, if I'm starting to pick up that signals from my exterior antenna have a lot of noise in it, a lot of garbling in it, can I stop and say, hey, Sam, my colleague, what's going on? It seems like we're talking past each other, or there are things that are unstated. And that, in a sense, with the intention not of bludgeoning Sam for being a clod, but with the intention of having a good work relationship, that's an intimate act. That's an act that builds a relationship. It's saying, I want it better with you. What's going on with us, and what can we do about it?
You're bringing up the dilemma, and then you're also setting the vision for the future of what you're hoping for.
Right.
One of the most interesting examples in the book was actually with the relationship between the two of you, and how it was great. And then you guys had a potentially relationship threatening incident happen, but you climbed the wall and you got to the meadow, and you guys now have an even more exceptional relationship than you already had. Can you give the audience an idea of what happened and how you got that relationship to be even better by going through the hardship?
Well, it wasn't just that it threatened it. It temporarily ended it.
Wow.
Right.
Well,
right.
Carole wasn't going to talk to me.
I said I would never talk to David again. And we actually had reached the meadow, and we'd been climbing towards the summit. We were way past the meadow.
Yeah. We had a tight relationship,
and we were very close. And of course, we've talked earlier about risk. The closer the relationships become, the more you have to be willing to risk in order to keep climbing. In some regards, not willy-nilly. I'm not just saying just go risk it right, but David did something, or more accurately, didn't do something that, I wanted his support in something. You'll all have to read the book to get the full story, because it'll take us too long to tell you. But I wanted David to do something for me on my behalf that he did not do, for a lot of good reasons. But I was so aggrieved and pissed and astonished that he wouldn't do this for me, that it shook my belief in our relationship to its very core. I thought, wow, everything I think this relationship has been built on is a house of cards. And, I don't need him. I don't want him in my life. I'm done with him. That's
very painful for me. Very painful.
I can imagine.
And obviously, one of the things we talk about in the book is that anger is a secondary emotion, and often there are a lot of feelings underneath anger. I was incredibly angry, as you can hear, but I was also so disappointed and so sad. And I was in a state of protecting myself. And that's why, so it was devastating for both of us. And of course,
let me break in, Carole, because there's a point here which I think ties back to what Patrick was talking about. So after this break, we got together and to try to figure it out. And we got into a logical discussion, back to what you had talked about yourself, a logical discussion about what was going on. And we went back and forth. And Carole said what she wanted, and I said why I thought that wasn't necessary, da, da, da. It not only didn't get anywhere, it made it worse. The logic didn't work. So tell what happened, Carole.
Yeah. So it was after that I said I was never going to talk to him again. And I was fortunate enough to have some people in my life who kept saying to me, really? You're going to throw away this 17-year relationship, your mentor, one of the closest people to you in your life, over this? I was like, yes. We just obviously we just don't have enough in common. Obviously we see the world too differently. No, so I had to go lick my wounds a bit. And David, God bless him, the one thing that he did that was very clear was say, I'm here, by the way. If you ever decide you want to come back and talk about this, I'm here. And he also didn't keep pushing me. He didn't keep, it was like he let me kind of have my little hissy fit. And then eventually this is the whole last chapter of the book. Eventually we did sit down, and having learned the lesson of not going down the logic track and trying to make each other wrong for why we'd each done what we'd done, we decided to actually listen to each other. We decided to actually feel what the other person was feeling.
To become empathic and not judgmental.
And meet each other emotionally. And that's when we realized, oh, you know what? We really do have something special here. And then our relationship went to yet another level. And in fact, we'd have never written a book together if we hadn't.
In fact, what I also want to ask is, after that discussion in which we really understood the other person, neither of us agreed with the other person's position. That was irrelevant.
Yeah.
So we didn't try to justify or de-justify the other person, but we could understand the other person at a deep emotional level. And that's what did it.
There's so many takeaways from the situation you guys broke down. And for those that want to learn more, they can buy the book and learn about the full situation there. Such an interesting place that you guys were at. And it's so cool to see that you guys are in an even better place than you would have been previously. I think you guys finish off with an analogy to a Japanese art form called Kinsugi, which is a certain way that we can look at our relationships. Can you describe that Japanese art form and how it applies to your relationship and the way that the rest of us should be looking at relationships as well?
Yeah, it's interesting. A friend of mine told me about this. When pottery breaks, often we try to mend it in a way where you never see the break. In that form of art, Japanese art, when there's a break, they mend it. But what they do is not try to cover up the crack, but they fill the crack with precious metal, gold, silver, or platinum, to highlight the crack. Because they say, this crack is part of the history. This crack is part of what this pottery is. And we don't want to ignore it. We don't want to forget it. In a sense, we want to celebrate it. And I think that the story that Carole just told about us was that crack. We don't deny it. We don't hide it. I mean, we publicize it because it shows we both are flawed individuals. We teach this material, but we make mistakes. But we also have the ability to recover. And we have covered that crack with a lot of wonderful gold because that's an important part of who the two of us are.
Which makes the vase even more beautiful.
Yes.
That's it. I think that is one of the biggest takeaways from the book. Climbing that wall, fixing that pot, getting to the meadow, having that, beautiful piece of pottery that you can appreciate is just so much better than, being afraid to take those steps to commit. And I can tell you guys, I told Carole this before we jumped on the phone. I have already implemented some of the stuff with a couple personal relationships in my life, particularly with my mom and my sister. So really excited to see where that goes. And I just have to thank you guys so much for taking the time with me today. I'm honored to have you guys on prior to the release of the book. I look forward to staying connected, and I will plan to speak with you guys soon.
Good. I enjoyed this very much.
Yeah, pleasure chatting with you. Thank you so much for the opportunity to let us tell our story.
And thank you, Patrick, for talking about yourself too. You really joined with us.
I try to disclose.
Yeah.
You're working on it nicely.
There you go.
Thank you, guys.